So hi, I'm Carys. Yeah, as Hannah said, I'm a PhD researcher currently working on a CDP, so collaborative doctoral partnership studentship with National Museums and University of Leicester. And yeah, my doctoral research looks at the Ulster Folk Museum, which is one of the four museums that fall underneath National Museums and I'm sure many of you might know already, but this is a living history museum in Belfast, well, just outside Belfast, with an expansive rural area which was developed from the 60s onwards, with the museum officially opening in 1964. And the site itself is a large 136 acres. So my project, rather than focusing on a single individual, I'm approaching the museum as a project or a network. So looking at individuals involved, committees, political circumstances, professional networks, and intellectual frameworks that brought together the institution into being. So my PhD research unpacks how the Ulster Folk Museum was negotiated into existence through sustained advocacy and institutional collaboration. Overall, my project is aiming to produce a nuanced analysis of the establishment and early development of the museum, exploring how an understanding of the museum's founding ethos and key motivators behind the conception might inform and support its current and future transformation, particularly, as Hannah mentioned, in the context of its Reawakening project, which through transformative investment aims to expand the museum's role as a heritage and environment resource. And this should make it more relevant and more resilient for future and current and future generations. So I think really excitingly, my research can be used as a tool for thinking about how our learnings from the archive translate onto site today, which is what I want to talk about today, and how might my own reawakening of the museum's history translate and support the reawakening of the site today. Has that changed? The next slide.
It has, yes.
Perfect, thank you. So today, I just wanted to quickly explore three interrelated questions. So what were the museum's core founding principles? How are these principles reflected or reconfigured in the museum's current direction? And what does researching the history reveal about archival access, institutional memory, and the practical challenges of documenting our own organisational pasts? So the intellectual architecture of the museum illustrates the direction and knowledge of key scholars such as Emma Reston Evans, with his influence and others such as George Thompson, who was the museum's first director, clearly influential on site today. Evans' geographical approach, shaped by early 20th century regional geography and folklife studies, positioned Ulster not as a homogenous cultural unit, but as a province comprised of what he termed miniature environments. But this was quite a concept that was very new to Northern Ireland and Ulster, and Evans really brought that here. So yeah, these environments were understood as historically layered by Evans and environmentally conditioned, producing distinct yet interconnected forms of material and social life. So what you see as founding ethos throughout the museum and throughout the archive is these ideas of regional differences, but also sharing common shared heritage and celebrating that as well. So in examining archival material such as early trustee minutes, correspondence, draft legislation, and exhibition planning documents, I've identified three founding principles. First, a salvaging of heritage, both tangible and intangible. Rapid socio-economic transformation in the mid-20th century was perceived as threatening the survival of vernacular architecture, craft practices, and everyday rural life and traditions. The museum was conceived as a response to this. Second, the museum acts as an explicitly educational mandate. The museum was envisaged not simply as a repository of objects, but as a centre for folklife studies, a research centre. Its founders emphasised documentation through multiple media, photography, sound recording, film, written archives. Third, a commitment to regional pluralism. In contrast to contemporary nationalist and unionist historiographies that tended towards singular cultural narratives, Evans' framework, which you can see on site, emphasised heterogeneity within continuity, an essential unity grounded not in uniformity, but in the shared historical processes expressed differently across space and regions. So he's thinking not only about regional differences, but how far back we can go and how many continuities there are throughout the past in Ulster. Museum spatial configuration at Cultural operationalised this philosophy. Landscape, architecture, and interpretation were structured to materialise regional differentiation within a single institutional setting. These principles, urgency, education, and regional differences, structured the early decades of the museum's development and make up the clear shared ethos between the key figures involved. So, in assessing alignment between founding principles and current institutional direction, several continuities are striking to me. Firstly, there is an enduring commitment to everyday life. The museum continues to foreground vernacular material culture and ordinary experience, rather than elite or monumental histories. This emphasis remains foundational to its interpretive identity. Secondly, the integration of tangible and intangible heritage. From its inception, the institution recognised the importance of documenting oral traditions, craft knowledge, and the social practice alongside architecture and artefacts. Today, both the historical interpreters and craft workers continue to reawaken past traditions and everyday practices. Thus, the museum's founding methodology appears as a precedent for this, as opposed to outdated. Thirdly, utilising landscape as interpretive argument. The museum's open-air format continues to function as a spatial framework. Buildings are not merely displayed, they are situated within environmental and social contexts. This spatialised historiography remains central to the museum's distinctiveness. The early aspiration to serve as both museum and research centre persists, as the museum began as both educational and public facing, so research centre. However, today it's reframed through contemporary strategic language emphasising access, engagement, and public value. These continuities suggest that the institution's core epistemological commitments have not been left in the past, rather they have evolved over time, and I'd say in a very positive way. So importantly, my research illustrates previous mission statements, which is something I've been looking at recently, which I believe really resonate on site today. Quotes taken from annual reports as seen here, and on the previous slide, show to what extent the Folk Museum retains its own contemporary relevance today. In other words, in an increasingly divided and globalised world, the museum's pioneering model of heritage as both shared and regionally distinctive offers a powerful and contemporary relevant framework for understanding community identity and place. And I was saying to Hannah before the session started that I feel like the reason the museum was set up in the first place and the founding ethos behind it is arguably even more important today than it was when it was set up, which is why it's so important that we're reawakening the Folk Museum. So today, the museum now operates within a profoundly altered social and intellectual environment. And I've sort of broken down these changes which can be seen. So I've sort of argued that the museum has gone from salvaging to sustainability. So the founding generation operated within sort of paradigm of rescue ethnology. So it was a mass saving project. They had a belief that traditional lives and traditions were vanishing irreversibly and disappearing. And then today, contemporary heritage practice, by contrast, engages more explicitly with sustainability, resilience, and co-production. So this urgency still remains, but its framing has shifted from preservation against disappearance to stewardship within ongoing change. I've also been thinking about how it's changed from documentation to reflexivity. So early institutional records prioritize documentation and reconstruction. Yeah, I've sometimes explained them as hoarders that set up the folk museum as the archive is that big. But I think this also just supports the argument of the folk museum being a math saving project. And a lot of these things people were really worried we were never going to see again. And so we need to save it all. I'd argue that present day museology demands reflexivity, so a critical awareness of representation, power, absence, and voice. So starting to question whose histories are foregrounded and whose remain marginal. So thinking about how figures such as Esther Evans and George Thompson have been sort of preferred or favoured histories, but then my own research starts thinking about which histories or contributions might have been overlooked. So yeah, my own research poses an exciting opportunity to represent overlooked contributors to the museum's history. So my recent archival research has shone light especially into women's histories at the museum. So looking at figures such as Catherine Harris, who was the museum's first field officer. So within the archive, Harris has often been referred to as just she, her, and not been named. However, as a figure, she did so much work for the museum in the early years, and hopefully this is something my work can showcase. Another change we see is sort of changing visitor experiences and expectations. So mid-20th century audiences often approached folk museums as sites of nostalgia, education. However, contemporary audiences bring more varied expectations. So perhaps immersive experiences, interactivity, critical interpretation, and engagement with complex identities. However, the things I've just listed, I feel the folk museum does really well. The institution, yeah. And then fourth, I've been thinking a little bit importantly about political and cultural recontextualizing. So the museum's founding occurred within the context of post-partition Northern Ireland, often described by Evans as experiencing an institutional vacuum. The cultural politics of the present are markedly different, especially with things like more tourist experiences within Belfast. However, Evans' emphasis on regional diversity rather than singular identity arguably provides a conceptual resource for navigating contemporary pluralism. So overall, these changes or tensions, as you might call them, are not evidence of a divergence from the founding principles of the museum, but rather they reflect the pressures inherent in sustaining a mid-20th century institutional model within a 21st century cultural landscape. I wanted to do a little bit of thinking and talking about working with museum archives. So overall, my experience of working with the archives has been deeply rewarding for my project and is so far really illustrating quite a clear and although complex sort of timeline of how the museum was set up. There's a big wealth of material, which, although challenging to get through, it's enabling me to begin to create a really detailed picture of what was going on. So using things such as trustee minutes, correspondence, photographic records, and exhibition documentation provides substantial insight into early decision-making processes and institutional networks. However, as with all archival research, the silences are almost as common as the documents themselves. So I was thinking about how informal debates preceding formal resolutions might not always be recorded, personal dynamics between key figures, the rationale for prioritizing particular acquisitions or interpretive strategies, and also just the everyday operational challenges that might not seem significant enough to minute. However, in the case of the Folk Museum archive, there is a lot of correspondence and a lot of arguments about toasters. So I think there's a good wealth of material that I could definitely get through. I also think that for my project, especially oral history has been really important. So not only using archival material, but making relationships and establishing relationships either with former staff members or individuals connected to the museum's early decades. They've sort of been really good at illuminating interpretive intentions, tensions, and contingencies that might have not been recorded in the archive. So in my own research, I've sort of been brainstorming about certain approaches I've taken in exploring the museum's past. So especially, firstly, documenting decision-making rationales, not only final decisions, so considering the conceptualization of the museum, not just at the opening day, but everything that was happening before. So future researchers might benefit from understanding why certain paths were taken and others rejected, often months of correspondence, as I've mentioned, over a seemingly small detail, such as toasters, will actually include crucial background context as well. So acknowledging everyday operational history, financial constraints, logistical challenges. I've seen some really good images of George Thompson trying to get a boat into a van to get it to the museum. So that was quite fun to see. So an interpersonal relations shaping institutions profoundly as formal policy statements. So not only thinking about sort of big sort of policies, but looking at the networks of people that were working around that. So I've been doing a bit of thinking about the collaboration between the Ulster Folk Museum, or more so the Committee of Ulster Folk Life and Traditions, which was a committee that was kind of working alongside the museum, and their collaboration with the Irish Folklore Commission, which has actually been really eye-opening into seeing how much collaboration there was, which has sometimes been questioned. And then also treating anniversaries as archival opportunities. So milestone years providing structured moments to capture founding recollections and retrospective reflections before they are irretrievable. So many speeches I have uncovered in the archive have been from later years and have proved to be invaluable in illustrating how the museum was set up. So these are just some images of the variety and wealth of material that we hold on Catherine Harris, who I've mentioned previously. So as I said, often figures such as Esther Evans and George Thompson have been sort of the more prioritised narratives so far into the museum's history that we know the most about so far. However, women such as Catherine Harris and Dame Dara Parker were fundamental to the museum's trajectory in the early days. Parker, the first and only woman appointed to hold ministerial office in the Northern Ireland government, she played an instrumental role, particularly right at the start of when the museum was first being conceptualised, in securing governmental support for the museum. So the other day I found a letter from 1939, which was the sort of correspondence that was going in within government before the whole museum was opened, and she was instrumental in finding that support. And then, yeah, so she played an instrumental role in securing governmental support for the museum at a time when many of its proponents were men. Harris, she plays a more practical but also fundamental role as one of the earliest staff members at the museum, as field officer, and produced a wealth of material as she collected heritage from across Ulster in the field, as seen through saved index cards, which is the central image there. So to return to the central question that I was really thinking about in preparing for this talk, how closely aligned are the museum's founding principles with its present and future direction? I'd suggest that the alignment is substantial but ever-changing. The core commitments to everyday life, to regional plurality, to educational purpose, and to integrating material and intangible heritage remain consistent. So what I think has shifted is the interpretive and political context within which those commitments operate. Continuity and change are not oppositional categories, they are co-constructive. The institutional's capacity to adapt whilst retaining its foundational intellectual framework may in fact be evidence of the durability of that framework. So what I was saying before is that Evans and other figures, as I've mentioned, were constructing such a sort of pluralistic model of heritage, and that's one that's definitely remained through to present day. If Evans conceived of landscape as reflecting society, then a museum structured around landscape must inevitably evolve as society evolves. The question is not whether change occurs, but how consciously and reflexively it is navigated. In that respect, the ongoing challenge for the museum as it enters its Reawakening project, and for many comparable institutions, is to sustain its foundational ethos whilst engaging critically with new audiences, new historiographies, and new expectations. Thank you. That's about it.
Oh, that's super, Carys. Thank you so much. It's it's fascinating to hear how those founding principles have almost evolved as communities have evolved, and yet they're still so obviously there as well. Did anyone have any comments or queries to ask?
But just as one comment I noticed on your last slide there, Carys, you say about documenting or recording sort of staff knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing I think that's critical. Sort of. In fact, tomorrow I'm going back into the Highland Folk Museum. I mean, I've been retired 14 years to have my brain picked, and I think, and I know Cultra well as well. Um, us old so and so's have got a lot locked up here, and I'm actually Irish, sort of having been brought up, sort of, remembering the 50s and things like that, and all. We we hold a lot of information which we have through our lives because of generational change, but also through our day-to-day work, and sort of it's sort of locked up in here, but we particularly these days with so many changes within museums and institutions and also do with funding. I think that's quite a critical thing to take on board, because as you're implying, I mean there's lots down on record cards and different things, but we are sort of in danger of losing a lot of information, that's been gathered. And we were talking about our colleague Catherine, who was sort of buried on Saturday. I mean, somebody like Catherine had a huge amount of knowledge about Lincolnshire and Norfolk as well. I'm not sure how we capture a lot of that information, but even within my own family, which I'm actually from near Dublin, but I mean, my maternal family from Island McGee, north of Belfast. And I mean, I've picked up a lot of information, over the years of my own research about sort of life there. But I think that's a big challenge, to what's available now and how that can help inform the way that you take the museums forward. I don't know if that makes sense, but I mean, as I think back to colleagues who've passed away, and when you say the founding principles of a museum, etc., disappearing fast.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's big things to think about. And definitely something I've been thinking about throughout my project is this. It's sort of the whole reason the Folk Museum was set up was this worry around disappearing knowledge and not only buildings, traditions, but also knowledge. I know, like, yeah. And I think something I've been thinking about is how personal the museum is. And it's sort of like a museum for the people, set up by people. Like, it's a very personal story. So I think that's why I've been very interested in speaking to sort of family members and things like that. And then we've had previous curators come in. So yeah, keeping those stories alive, and also if people want to have their story told, then this is like a perfect opportunity for people to have that. But yeah, it's a big challenge, and I'm sure, yeah,
I,
just lots to
I
think
think
about, really.
I think you're right there in the sense of museums are very personal, and I've said it several times over the years that museums reflect their sort of leaders or curatorial staff, and you can see that. I mean, I'll put my hand up for for saying that with the Highland Folk Museum that was responsible for collecting I think 23 thrashing machines. I mean, that, farming is my big interest.
Hmm.
And I have no, sort of no doubt that I help contribute to them emphasizing that side rather than some of the other sides. So I think there's, a story of different influences there as well. And how, as you say, how life, aspects are changing now, more reflection on women's lives and that side of thing, which I think is really, really important. But it's only just coming to much to the fore now.
Bridget, oh, hang on. You might have to unmute. I may have muted you. Sorry. I get trigger happy with the mute button. Sorry. Can you let's do that.
I think I'm unmuted now, am I?
You're there.
Yes, yes. Okay. Carys, thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. I a few years ago I did quite a lot of work on the abortive attempt to set up an English folk museum, English open air museum. And there, a lot of the time, the people who were involved at there were about 5 attempts to do this. And they were referring always to a sort of much wider context, like the museums in Scandinavia is the obvious example. And I wondered whether you were finding anything similar to that in Ulster with the culture.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't manage to touch on that, but yeah, it follows on from this mass European open air movement.
Mm,
So yeah, it's heavily influenced. And funnily enough, we have correspondence between Skansen and here. And then
right.
I've been in touch with Skansen, who have sent me 16 letters or 10 letters from George Thompson, who was the director here, and then CB, who was his predecessor before. So we definitely have evidence of this sort of mass sort of exchange of knowledge.
Right.
But that's definitely something that I think throughout my whole project I really want to get into and
Yes.
found exactly how much how much exchange there was. Especially we find here in the questionnaires that we have in the Ulster Folk Life, which was the publication happening alongside the museum. I think it's literally in the first Ulster Folk Life published in 1955. They talk about how the questionnaires are a borrowed concept from Scandinavia. So they were using Scandinavian questionnaires in their own questionnaires.
Yes.
And then, funny enough, talking about Catherine Harris, you can basically find all sharing, all borrowing throughout the entire archive every day.
Yes.
If you wanted to look for it, you could find it every day in everything they do. But Catherine Harris had books sent to her about threshing and like horse skulls, which I passed on to Victoria, who's my supervisor, who I think's in the chat. But they're just, yeah, shared traditions, and it's all sort of going back as well. Eston Evans was an archaeologist as well, so he was very interested in how far back these sort of traditions went as well. So he not only looking at sort of like curatorial practice, but sort of more of like, I know he was looking about like European peasantry and things like that. So I think there's an even bigger umbrella of shared knowledge going over the top of that. So there's so much, I would say. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I could talk about that all day.
Carys, do you know, have you read The Making of Amphasca by Isabel Grant? It's the founding of the Highland Folk Museum. Because
I'll give it a read.
Sorry?
I'll give it a read.
Yeah, it's well worth it. Published by the National Museum of Scotland. It's her own reminiscences. I mean, apart from her own Highland main book, 1961, about the Highland Folk Museum, but it's really might give you a sort of different perspective on sort of the founding of the folk museum, because as I say, it takes her from going from one museum in 1930 and an exhibition, and then another site, and then the Canusi site, and of course, we now have the Newtonmore site. It's not a big book, but it's a really interesting read.
No, that's great. No, it seems to be quite a pattern that these museums kind of have to go through multiple challenges of even getting it set up. So I only found out the other day that they wanted to put the folk museum by the Ulster Museum just in the back garden, like just have like a bleaching tower in the botanical gardens, which I just think is crazy. And then they like got a bit bigger, and it was going to go to like Belfast Castle, and then they eventually went for the 136 acres here. But I think there is that, especially with these museum types, there's sort of those challenges of, I think someone said you had to try 5 times to get the museum through. So yeah, I think they're all pretty similar in their ethos and their challenges, really.
Mm-hmm. Muted, David.
David's muted.
I think I might have muted him as well.
Oh, help, help, help.
You're there, David.
Am I?
Yeah.
I can't see anything. I want to see you. Use microphone and camera. Don't know what's going on.
We can see you.
Can you?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I don't like talking to a blank screen. That would put me off terribly. Hang on a minute. What do I get rid of? Enter meeting. Oh, I'm back onto the joining again here. Join.
That's very strange.
Yeah. Somebody else talk while I fiddle myself here.
For Carys.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, very good. Perfect. I'll give it a whirl.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that one was set up by a woman, was it? The only
Yes.
one in the UK to have done so.
First folk life open air museum.
Yeah.
Finally, officially opened in June 4th, 1944, just before D-Day. But the first place was 1930.
It's impressive to open during a world war as well.
Yeah, she's an amazing lady, tall lady.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about Isabel Grant?
Yeah, used to drive around in a convertible car and drive up to people and say, "You got that old wooden so-and-so," and she said, sort of like a wooden vessel. "I'll give you this nice shiny enamel one," and she quick them all away.
Yeah.
Incredible lady.
David will put me right, but David, there's been a new biography of you with Pete, hasn't there? From the Welsh Folk Museum. Yes, that's the one. Carys, I think that you'd find that interesting too.
Yeah, definitely. The lecturer that lectured Pete was the same. So it was Lafleur who lectured Eston Evans as well.
Yes.
Eston Evans actually grew up on the borderland between Wales and England, so in Shropshire. So I think you see quite a lot of sharing in sort of regional differences and geography approaches. So no, definitely, thank you.
Well, if I can add one more, my old place.
Has my presentation not shown how much archival material I have? I'll do some more.
We're just making
sending you a reading list, I think. So that's the Weald and Downland book, I think, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's just showing off, I think.
Yeah.
It's showing off you've got the book.
My alma mater.
I wanted to follow. Oh, am I mute still?
No.
No.
We hear you, David.
I wanted to follow up a little bit on the what strikes me very clearly is I can hear myself bouncing back here.
Right, that might be George. There we go.
All right. Things are different in England, it seems to me, throughout the whole of this story in trying to find and hold a sense of place and watch that focus survive or not survive, depending not least on local government structures that we have. Life's so much easier in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, to tap into a rich seam. And as I've never been to the museum we're talking about, which I'm sorry to have to confess that, I'm as intrigued by where it is as what it is historically. If you look at the Welsh Folk Museum, for example, as was, it's there for a reason or series of reasons. Bob's just mentioned the Highland Folk Museum gravitating from the wonderful Isle of Iona across to the country. You try and establish something similar in England, it's so much more difficult. And it's so much more difficult to find, therefore, the Catherine Harrises of this world doing their bit in Leicestershire, Northamptonshire, Lincolnshire. And it's interesting to hear you talking about what is, by comparison, a very safe bet of a located national museum not being moved. It's safe where it is, presumably, as far as anything is. And it's got deep roots as a result of still being there. It's one of the points worth making. You can't shift a museum from A to B without losing a disproportionate amount of the sort of memory that we've been talking about and the links and the sense of place. So the comparisons with certainly this chap, and that's an all-male story, which you don't need me to say that, but it's a classic example. What an individual. Please write something on Catherine Harris to sit eventually alongside these volumes as part of your work, if I may be so bold about it. Get it done. How much does the site matter still to the community in Ulster as a focal point? The reawakening, or the terminology which you're using and the project uses, assumes that it is a safe base. Is it?
So I think, and if Victoria's in the chat, she might be able to help me out a bit with this question, because she's like the real expert. But I think my project is really helping to sort of uncover the importance of the site, looking at how the museum was operating not only on sort of a regional or a national, but sort of like a international scale. So I think that's why it's so important that we're reawakening it through not only the reawakening of the museum's history, but also then through building new buildings and things like that. So I think all these things are helping to establish its importance and showcase its importance, which I think hasn't been done enough so far. So I think that's really what I'd argue is why it's happening, all the reawakening, is because we're uncovering how important it is. Yeah, the site itself is, yeah, it's obviously just outside of Belfast. I think it was, I mean, the land was available, which is why it's here. And it wasn't too expensive. It was £24,750, and it's 136 acres. They got a bargain, really. They bought all the land down to the sea because they originally wanted to make a maritime museum with literal boats floating, but then they ran out of money, so that's how far they actually managed to get. But yeah, I definitely don't think the museum will be going anywhere. I think it's very safe. And I think it's really interesting for me to see how the story of the museum's developed so much already, looking from, it basically came out of Belfast Museum and Art Gallery and Queen's University Geography Department, sort of academic and institutional collaboration. And then to sort of see that evolution of just an idea, and then to build and build and build, it makes me think, I wonder how much the museum will build further, given how much it's done since 1964 or 19, yeah. Yeah.
And I think as well, yeah, just kind of I'm here just to maybe build upon what Carys was saying and going back to your question there a little bit about, the reawakening. I did do a Train the Concession a little while ago, which is on the YouTube channel, so do check that out if you haven't seen it before. But I think within it, I do allude to the fact, kind of the reasoning behind Reawakening. So traditionally, visits to the Ulster Folk Museum, I know I'd be an example of this, where people tend to have visited the museum throughout different life stages. So usually, people visit when they're a child at school, then they'll come back maybe when they have their own children, and then when they have their grandchildren. So one of the things we want to um, expand upon through the Reawakening is that visitors come back more often, and it not be sort of just those life stage events that people come back to the museum, and lots of people have a very warm feeling towards the museum and a sense of nostalgia with it. But we want to kind of use the Reawakening as a way to encourage repeat visits to the museum, and for it to be a contemporary resource that they can utilize through, whether it be taking part in a workshop or volunteering on site, or whatever an example could be, that there's repeat visits versus sort of just life stage events that you're maybe coming a few times in your life. So that's kind of one of the aspects of the Reawakening, what we're hoping to do with the changes that we're planning to make on site.
There's there's a question really when sort of I can understand that, but one of the things I became very aware of years ago was the fact that we had generations coming, looking at the way the folk museum was set up. The newer farming generations had no idea what they were looking at. So yes, you sort of rely on the older generations to interpret for the younger ones, but at what stage can you keep going with what you've got for that interpretation by different generations to continue? So I think, for example, Beamish, where they've now added the 1950s town, which is fine for, I'm in my 70s. So, I mean, for me, to go with a young person, yes, I can, interpret things like that. I mean, I think back to, was at the Wealden Downland a long time ago now, but I mean, at one point we were going to introduce a 1970s style wimpy house, which probably would have horrified people at the time. But if you think, if we had done that, that would sort of lead into a more recent generation to be able to interpret that style of house. But at what stage, whether it be Cultra or Folk Museum or wherever, do we really lose that nostalgia connectivity with the previous generation? So how do we build a bridge from the present into past generations? And I know that's a really expensive thing to do, and sort of I only know too well what it takes to actually sort of
I suppose
re-erect more buildings and things.
I suppose there's different ways in which different open air museums are doing it, as you've mentioned there, Beamish creating sort of different aspects of the site on different time periods. St. Fagans, you kind of go from building to building, which jump around in date. For ourselves here at the Folk Museum, we are centred to sort of early 20th century, so we don't jump around in date beyond that. So nor do we have maybe the capacity to build a 1950s town, or maybe the appetite even to do that, or 1970s or 80s now. So one of the things we're looking at is how we can use the past to help inform, today's audiences and audiences of the future. So just taking as an example, like rag rugging as a very basic example that's practiced and performed on site, where the guides are making the rag rugs from, the rags and whatever around them. We're then using that as a talking point for visitors today to look at, sustainability and how they can, reuse their clothes or recycle clothes in order to kind of be more in tune with the environment and sort of less waste, and so things like that. So using sort of the historic example, admittedly, some things they'll not be familiar with, but I suppose it's us to kind of interpret that for them, but then trying to bring that into their lives today and explain how they can maybe use something from the past to help inform, something they do in the present. So that is something that we're trying to explore, where we don't have that luxury of having a 1980s town, that we can rely on the fact that, someone's parent or grandparent's going to come with them to help interpret that time period. So yes, it is going to become more and more alien in a sense where people are going to come into this environment and not, have a grandparent to just say, oh, this is what this house looked like in my day. So the onus will be on us to kind of interpret that for the visitors, but also with a view to try and have some comparison for people today to understand what that means for them and any learnings they can bring into their own lives. But yeah, it's no easy feat one way or the other, whether you've got one specific time period or three or four, because as you say, the time keeps going on. So you have the 1950s, then it goes to the 80s, then it goes to the 2000s. It's an ongoing thing.
Oh, it is an ongoing thing. But I think another aspect too is how do you build in the ongoing programming for your staff to truly have a real grip of what they're interpreting? And I think that's a big question for particularly living history museums. What, as you say, whether you're using traditional crafts or information associated with it. I mean, over the years, I can see a lot of that knowledge is being watered down. And I mean, I think a very essential part is training, because, for example, when we restarted the Highland Folk Museum at Newton Moor in '97, I mean, we were very reliant, which I know was at Cultura too, and sort of people who knew about old style farming, old domestic duties and all the rest. And we had a very good sort of staff training program. But a lot of that has sort of disappeared. So I think, for, as you called it, the reawakening, sort of how do you build that in, and with the move towards more just an intangible culture as well. I think it's certainly well worth a big consideration.
Yeah, well, it is something that definitely our general manager and visitor services staff at the museum, plus our sort of HR department are working on. So as we've been developing the plans for Reawakening, we've been constantly engaging, with the visitor services staff who are the ones on the ground delivering the messages to visitors. So as part of this, there will be sort of an engagement and training program, which will bring them along on the journey, so that if there is sort of a change in message or a change in approach, that they should be brought along on that journey as well. And it's not just sort of these sort of new exhibition buildings pop up and that they're completely unconnected from those. So it is thought of as part of the plans, and something that we would be expected to do, through our funders, through both the Department for Communities, who's a key funder for us, and National Lottery Heritage Fund. So you have to kind of show that as well, that your staff are being brought along on the journey and trained appropriately. So it is a key concern, and something that we are planning for. And even an example being, Carys's PhD and the research that she's doing, will be then shared with staff here, and that will build up their knowledge of the history of the site. And since I've been in post, I've been doing quite a lot of research into the history of the buildings and things, which then has been relayed to the staff, because quite often in visitor services, you do get new staff coming in, on a quite cyclical basis, and you're then having to sort of re-inform people about the site who maybe don't know much about it. So yeah, it's a big task, and it's one that just is an ongoing thing.
That I appreciate, having been there.
Yeah.
Could I just ask you about timetable? Where are you in the process of moving towards an opening date, and is there one for the entire project at one and the same time?
So we are currently aiming around 2030 or thereabouts for sort of the opening of these new buildings. So the new buildings I'm referring to is, there's one called the Culture Hub, which is sort of the introductory building. That'll be the building that visitors come to first, where their ticket, the shop, the cafe will be. There'll also be introductory exhibits, kind of introducing the collections and what we hold in the collection. There'll also be a temporary exhibition gallery, which we don't have currently. So that'll be a nice chance to display objects that are currently in storage and we can't necessarily put out in the open air museum. There's also another building called the Industry Zone, and it's going to house our industry collections, which are held through the Ulster Museum's collection, actually. So they're not part of the Folk Museum's collection, but they're held in off-site storage at the minute. And these collections will come out into the Industry Zone, and they'll be located opposite a row of houses we have from Belfast, which are industrial houses. So the plan is to kind of complement one another, where the people who would have lived in the houses we have at the museum would have been working in textile mills and brick fields and things like that. So the collections across the way in the new exhibition building will kind of complement that. And then there's other aspects of the Reawakening project in terms of new signage, wayfinding, but also signage relating to the exhibit buildings, as well as like refresh exhibitions or education spaces as well, and various workshop spaces to give visitors an opportunity to maybe book onto a course on, you know, a certain, it could be woodworking, it could be some sort of textile skills and what have you. So yeah, the plan is to have all that by 2030, all being well.
Thank you.
Amazing project, Victoria, and Carys, thank you so much for sharing your research. I'm kind of intrigued by the institutional archive and project archives as well, and wondered whether or not Carys's work was informing Victoria, yours and other colleagues' approach to how you archive as you're going through this amazing transformation sort of thing. You know, are there things that have been particularly eye-opening for you, Carys, in the archives that you've accessed, that maybe it's not the formal minutes, as you say, it's sort of the kind of more of the discussion elements that maybe in a current digital world we're in danger of losing because they'll sit in inboxes and then just be wiped away when colleagues leave, and how we kind of maybe learn from that to help the archivists of the future to interpret our museums of today.
Yeah, I think throughout my project I've just kind of been uncovering how important these archives are. A lot of it isn't digitized or catalogued, so sort of working through it. And yeah, as I've kind of mentioned, is seeing how this museum was operating on such an international scale. So we often have sort of, especially going to like George Thompson there. I think when he got his OBE, someone just sent like a telegraph saying "we," because that was like as much as they wanted to pay for. So sort of, yeah, seeing like these international networks working as I go along and understanding more. There is, like, as I've said, a lot in there, but I think that's really helpful for my project. It's what it needs to have such a detailed, that's what I really want to get out of this, is such a detailed investigation into why exactly it was set up. I think we've got like the basics down, sort of like understanding exactly, but then looking more at sort of committee work and then more personal relationships as well. I'm really interested to see that. I mentioned that Dame Dara Parker was woman like heavily involved at the beginning, less so when the museum opened, but she really got the support from the government. So I'd be really interested to see what I can find out about sort of her relationship with Eston Evans before, seeing, you know, how long they'd been friends for and things like that, just to see, because then we can trace back exactly how early the museum goes. My project spans from 1929, which was the opening date of the Belfast Museum and Art Gallery on Stranmillis. So that sort of context, but looking how early we can go, really. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit.
It does, thank you. I'm I'm a selfish matter because I'm just coming on the back of a redevelopment, not in a Royal Museum, but in another setting. And we're now grappling with, we've just spent the last 7 to 10 years working on a big project, and how do we then archive that for those that come after us? And just trying to, as you say, it's often, it's not what's written in the formal minutes or the project boards or the whatever. It is more of those personal narratives, but how do we capture those in such a way that helps? But
Time,
it's
a lot of
fascinating.
time spent in
A lot of time,
yeah. a lot of time reading. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's such a wealth of material, and I'm sure you've seen the same. It's just how do you get through
Mm.
it? How do you make it? I think what's really good about my project is it should make it more accessible for people coming to the museum afterwards. So, you know, if you walk into the archive, you're not going to be like, oh, like what's going on? Hopefully I can sort of highlight the highlights of the archive, and then that might be a good starting point for people.
Give a good
I think,
pathway through to those stories.
yes. And also helping to catalogue a bit at the moment. I think me and Alistair, who works in the library, have worked out exactly how much of the Eston Evans collection we've catalogued so far. So just having like a better understanding of what we have, because some of the boxes I open, I'm like, oh my goodness. So hopefully by the end of my PhD, there'll be like more catalogued boxes. That'll be fun. So yeah.
Can I wave this again and just say,
You're not on commission, are you, David?
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I don't need the money. It's all right. This is a classic of a retired senior staff member of the Welsh Folk Museum site, who has written this history of this definitive guide entirely from, almost entirely from the museum's own archives, which he had a free run at. If you're looking for a model to persuade anybody to take that whole process seriously, wave a copy of that at them. Published by a Welsh publisher with only a small run, no large runs of here. It's absolutely fascinating to dip into the real record as it surfaces in this way. And from it, you see who the other players were.
Yes.
It's not an ego trip entirely about this chap, far from it. But there's the sort of group dynamic which appears in the minutes or the records in some form or another, and it's a good example.
It's I hope my microphone's better now because I've changed the setting. This project is actually, in a way, to me, highlights what we could lose in archival knowledge with the computer age. You know, everything sort of goes on email and things like that, and which is quite ephemeral. And the letters and things that were sent, in a way, they're considered ephemeral at the time, but they've stayed. You can still read them. And there's a lot of, I've said this before, there's a lot of stuff that's done on computer, which was done in the past, which is unreadable now because they haven't got the equipment to read it. But you can always read a letter. And it brings up another aspect of the archival knowledge that we could be losing for the future.
Yeah.
I think I'd agree with that, if only because my inbox is telling me it's too full and it needs me to delete things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely.
And can I just raise the thing when David was talking about the setting up of sort of open-air type museums in England. The Museum of East Anglian Life, as it became known, and it had a different name, a slightly different name before. That was tried to be set up to on the model of places like Sconson and Ultra, the Ireland and Welsh museums. Never quite achieved the same status, as it were. I think it was partly because when it was set up, the counties, it was Norfolk, Suffolk mostly, and a bit of Essex, they set up a committee system which could run a small town. So it's so top heavy that it was bound to not achieve what it really wanted to achieve. And I remember being told that the one of the committees, they went to visit Bockwright was that in the Netherlands, and they asked about things, how it was set up and how it was funded, and they were told about the Friends of the Museum. So the committee decided to set up a Friends of the Museum. I remember the director at the time told me he actually asked them who were the Friends of the Museum, and it turned out to be the Dutch government. So, you know, the backing of these other places, it needed sort of government backing, very much so, which it didn't get. It didn't come in East Anglia. So and places like Wilden Down, and actually they needed people like Chris Zoyner, who really
my best mentor.
Chris is unbounded. He's needed people to be big pushers to actually achieve something successfully.
There's a history of the Weald Downland as well, David, isn't there?
Yep.
I'm fairly certain. Thank you.
That's the best one.
That's
That's
yes.
twice now.
Oh, how many times have you been, David?
If only I had a book to push.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to call it to a close, unless anyone has anything else to share, and to say thank you again to Carys for sharing your research, and to wish you all the best for the remainder of your PhD, and looking forward to hearing more, hopefully reading future publications to rival those shared on screen. And a huge thank you again to everyone for joining this afternoon. And hopefully see you at another Chewing the Cud or Royal Museums Network event soon. So thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Carys.
coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the bibliography.
Your reading list is complete. Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.